A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
Hey Herman and Corin, I mentioned in a few episodes that I currently have the best smartphone that I've ever had. It is truly fantastic. It's the OnePlus Nord 3 5G running Oxygen 15, and specifically I have, the model number is CPH2493 with a front 16MP camera, and the rear camera is 50. It says, I'm reading out the Android specs, 50MP plus 8MP plus 2MP, so it's like an array of 3, I guess. Herman and Corin, used to have a very unfortunate habit of losing my phone, typically due to the phone falling into the bottom of a river. I grew up in Cork, Ireland, and the River Lee consumed a couple of my smartphones over the years, or leaving them at bars and places like that. So I would view smartphones as kind of almost disposable assets and expect to replace them every couple of years. And for that reason, never really invested in a decent smartphone. Maybe €200 at the absolute max, or 150 sometimes. And they were all, as you'd expect, pretty terrible. Rugged. I think the low point, I went once for a Yuli phone that had like just optimized for the biggest battery phone I could find on the market. That was kind of almost a novelty phone. Like, it would just last for so long, but that was the only thing it did well. Everything else was terrible, but the battery. So you just have a bad phone that would like last for many days. And the other ones were the rugged AliExpress phones that were the least rugged phones I've ever owned. So it wasn't a very fruitful series of purchases, very unsustainable. So I then realized recently, hang on, I think I've grown up. I haven't actually lost a phone in like 8 years. I trust myself. And instead of buying these repetitive, crappy phones, let's buy something decent. Now, I landed upon this phone, the CPH2493, because, well, I've mentioned I use AI for most purchasing decisions now, including this one. So I very detailed prompt saying that basically I want something that's going to be great for speech to text. I was using the onboard Futo keyboard, which is a really great project for those who are looking for speech to text that doesn't rely on the cloud and which is totally on device. So that was actually how I found this, and I think it was maybe, I'm going to say, 250 to 300. Still not a very high end phone, but I pushed the boat out just a little bit, and I wasn't expecting to like it as much as I do. It's not only not slow, which was the main thing that was driving me nuts on my old phone, but the camera is crazy good. And this camera has actually become incredibly useful. I mentioned I have this home inventory system called Homebox, and that I've been doing a lot of tech repairs recently. And the camera is so performant that I can literally zoom into a circuit board and see the pins that I can't even see with my naked eye. So that's been a major benefit for it. If I'm adding stuff to inventory, I can. So it's zoom performance, and it's how accurately it captures images at zoom is extraordinary. It's also made me take up just capturing photography as kind of a hobby. I contribute stock photographs to Pexels, which anyone is welcome to check out. And usually it's just things that, I blog sometimes. So I just like, if I see an interesting building or a cool scene, I'll take a photograph. And so many photos of little Ezra have been taken on this phone and videos that if I were to lose this phone, and I almost said God forbid, that's how much I'd hate to lose this phone. But if that did happen, I'd say I got so much value out of it and captured so many precious moments already. So Herman and Corin, for my next smartphone purchase, which I'm hoping won't be for a while, but realistically, this has opened my eyes to a better way that smartphones can actually be genuinely great for content creation, which is something that I always kind of dismissed as that's only for iPhone. Now I want to stay in the Android world. I definitely don't see myself ever running an iOS. I'm an Ubuntu and Android guy. That's my kind of thing. But if one were to buy a phone which was optimized, if I were optimizing for one feature, in the next thing it would probably be high performance photography, something that can actually do what my current phone can do, and even better. The one area where the photography capability lags a little bit is at nighttime, where, because I guess it's a small sensor phone, it's going to be a challenge regardless. So if one were to buy an Android device specifically looking for something that will deliver really great photos across a wide variety of different zoom ranges, the macro photography I mentioned, that's very handy for my inventory thing, the scene photography for creating stock, what are some what would you be looking for in the spec sheet? What kind of price tags are we talking? What manufacturers and what models? But because anything that we suggest today will be deprecated in as little as a few months, let's talk primarily about the specs we're looking at when trying to get a truly great camera into the constrained form factor of an Android device. Herman and Corin, over to you.
You know that feeling when you finally upgrade a piece of technology you've been using for years, and suddenly you realize you have been living in the dark ages? It is like the world just snapped into focus. That seems to be exactly where Daniel is at right now. Today's prompt from Daniel is about his new OnePlus Nord 3 5G, and it has clearly opened up a whole new world for him, especially regarding the camera and speech-to-text capabilities. It is funny, Herman, because we often focus on the $1,000 flagships, but for many people, a solid mid-ranger like the Nord is the first time they actually see what modern silicon can do.
Herman Poppleberry here, and I have to say, the Nord 3 is a fascinating choice for early 2026. Even though it has been out for a while, it represents that perfect sweet spot in the market. It is a solid mid-ranger that punches way above its weight class in certain areas, particularly because it used a flagship-grade sensor from the previous generation. But what really struck me about Daniel's prompt was how he is using the camera. He is not just taking family photos of little Ezra, though he mentioned he is doing plenty of that. He is using the zoom and macro capabilities to assist with tech repairs, looking at circuit board traces he cannot even see with his own eyes. That is a perfect example of a tool becoming an extension of our biological senses. It is the cybernetic eye we were promised in science fiction, just tucked into a pocketable slab of glass and aluminum.
It is brilliant. And now he is even contributing to pixels. It is amazing how the line between a consumer smartphone and a professional tool for stock photography has basically vanished for most use cases. If you have the right lighting and a steady hand, a modern phone can produce an image that is indistinguishable from a dedicated DSLR on a digital screen. But Daniel is already looking ahead. He has caught the bug, Herman. He has seen what a $300 or $400 phone can do, and now he wants to know what the absolute ceiling looks like. If he stays in the Android ecosystem and wants the ultimate photography experience, what does he need to look for on those dense spec sheets? He wants to go from very good to world class.
This is where it gets really fun, Corn. Because in the high-end Android market right now, in February of 2026, we are seeing a literal arms race between manufacturers like Samsung, Google, Xiaomi, and Vivo. If Daniel wants to move from a very good mid-range experience to a top-tier, world-class mobile photography setup, we have to talk about physics. We can talk about AI and software all day, but at the end of the day, photography is the art of capturing photons. To do that better, you need a bigger net. Specifically, we have to talk about sensor size.
Right, because everyone always talks about megapixels. Daniel mentioned his Nord has a 50 megapixel main sensor. To the average person, 50 million pixels sounds like a lot. It sounds like it should be enough to print a billboard. But you have always told me that the megapixel count is often the least important number on the sheet, or at least it is the most misleading one.
High megapixel counts can even be a disadvantage if the sensor itself is tiny. Think of a camera sensor like a bucket trying to catch rain. If you have 50 tiny thimbles spread out over a square foot, you might get a lot of individual measurements, but you are not catching much total water because of the gaps and the surface tension. If you have one giant bucket covering that same area, you are catching way more light, which means less noise, better color accuracy, and significantly better dynamic range. For a high-end experience in 2026, Daniel should be looking for what we call a 1-inch type sensor.
A full inch? That sounds massive for a phone. I mean, the phone itself is only a few inches wide. How do they even fit that in there without it looking like a cyclops?
It is a massive engineering challenge, which is why the camera bump on the back of phones has become a camera mountain. But it is the gold standard right now. We are looking at sensors like the Sony IMX989 or the newer LYT900 series. When you see a spec sheet that says 1-inch type sensor, you are getting a physical area that allows for much better natural bokeh. That is, that beautiful blurry background effect that separates the subject from the environment. On a small sensor, you have to fake that with AI, which often messes up the hair or the edges of glasses. On a 1-inch sensor, the physics of the lens and the sensor size create that blur naturally. It also means Daniel's night shots will be significantly cleaner. He mentioned the Nord struggles a bit at night, and that is simply because those smaller pixels are starving for light. They are trying to amplify a very weak signal, which creates digital noise, or graininess.
So, step one for Daniel is looking at the physical size of the sensor, usually expressed in fractions of an inch or the size of the individual pixels in microns. What is a good micron size to aim for if he is looking at the raw specs?
For a main sensor, you want to see something around 1.6 microns for the individual pixels or even larger. Now, many manufacturers use a technique called pixel binning, where they combine 4 or even 8 pixels into one large superpixel. So a 50 megapixel sensor might effectively act like a 12.5 megapixel sensor, but with 3.2 micron pixels. That is where the magic happens for low light. But we also need to talk about the glass. You can have the best sensor in the world, but if the lens in front of it is low quality, it doesn't matter. The aperture is huge.
That is the f-stop number, right? Like f1.8 or f1.7? I always get confused. Is a smaller number better or worse?
In this case, smaller is wider, which is better for letting in light. Think of it like a window. A smaller f number means a bigger window. In 2026, we are seeing flagship phones with variable apertures, meaning the phone can physically open and close the iris of the lens. This is huge for Daniel's tech repairs. If he is doing macro work on a circuit board, a wide open aperture like f1.4 gives him a very shallow depth of field. That means only a tiny sliver of the board is in focus, while the rest is blurry. That might be great for an artistic shot of a flower, but for a repair it is frustrating. Being able to stop down the lens to f4.0 allows him to get the whole board in focus while still having that high-end sensor quality. It gives him the flexibility of a real camera.
That is a great point. I remember when we talked about the quest for vanilla Android in episode 774, we touched on how software bloat can sometimes get in the way of the camera app's performance. If the software is sluggish, you miss the shot of little Ezra doing something cute. But Daniel's interest in stock photography means he probably cares about the raw output as much as the instant capture. He is probably doing some post-processing, right?
Oh, absolutely. If he is serious about pixels and high-end work, he needs to look for Ultra RAW or Pro RAW support. This allows him to bypass the heavy-handed processing, the sharpening, the saturation, the noise reduction, that some manufacturers like Samsung or Xiaomi sometimes apply too aggressively. He gets the raw data from that 1-inch sensor and can edit it in Lightroom or Capture One. It is the difference between buying a pre-baked cake and getting the high-quality ingredients to bake it yourself. You have much more control over the shadows, the highlights, and the white balance. For stock photography, that is essential because buyers want a clean, natural image they can color grade themselves.
I like that analogy. Now, Daniel specifically mentioned zoom and macro. The Nord 3 is doing a good job for him now with its digital zoom and that dedicated macro lens. But how does a high-end Android phone take that to the next level? Is it just more digital cropping, or is there something more mechanical going on?
No, and this is where the price goes up significantly. He needs to look for a periscope telephoto lens. In a standard camera, the lens moves forward and back to zoom. You can't really do that in a thin phone without a giant snout sticking out. So, engineers use a prism. The light comes in, hits a prism at a 90-degree angle, and travels sideways down the body of the phone through a series of lenses to a sensor tucked away in the chassis. This allows for 5 times, 10 times, or even lossless, 30 times zoom without making the phone 3 inches thick. If he is looking at a spec sheet, he should check the focal length equivalent. Anything over 100 millimeters is getting into serious telephoto territory. For his tech repairs, this means he can stand back, have plenty of light on the board, and still see the microscopic serial number on a chip.
And for his circuit boards, he mentioned he uses the macro a lot.
That is usually handled by the ultra-wide lens on high-end phones. On mid-range phones like the Nord, they often throw in a dedicated 2-megapixel macro lens just to pad the spec sheet so they can say it has a triple camera system. But those 2-megapixel sensors are usually terrible. On high-end phones, the ultra-wide lens has autofocus, which allows it to act as a macro lens. The quality difference between a dedicated 2-megapixel macro lens and a 50-megapixel ultra-wide used for macro is night and day.
It sounds like the Nord 3 has one of those 2-megapixel macros Daniel mentioned, an array of 3, 50 plus 8 plus 2. So that 2-megapixel one is probably what he is using for his repairs, and he is already impressed. Imagine what he would think of a 50-megapixel macro with a high-end ISP.
It would blow his mind, Korn. He would be seeing the individual microscopic solder spheres and microscopic cracks in the traces that are invisible to the naked eye. It is a completely different level of fidelity. He could practically do forensic engineering with it.
We should probably talk about the specific models that are leading the pack right now in early 2026. But before we get into the heavy hitters like the S26 Ultra or the Pixel series...
Herman, are you there? Bubbly?
Oh, Mum, I am actually in the middle of recording the show right now. We are live to tape, remember?
I know. I just wanted to remind you. I left that container of brisket in your fridge, but you have to return the Tupperware this time. The blue lid one, not the green one, the blue one. It is part of a set, Herman. I can't have my sets getting all mixed up.
Hi, Dorothy.
Oh, hello, Corn. You look thin. Are you eating enough? Herman, make sure you eat some of that brisket. It has the carrots you like. And don't forget the dentist on Tuesday, okay? You have that sensitive tooth. Love you, bye.
Love you too, Mum. Bye. Sorry about that, Korn. She still hasn't quite grasped how the live recording works. She thinks it is like a phone call that everyone happens to be listening to.
I actually think our listeners love a Dorothy cameo. It adds a bit of flavor. And honestly, I could go for some brisket. But let's get back to Daniel's camera quest. We were talking about the hardware, the glass, and the sensors, but we should probably touch on the computational side too. Because in 2026, a big sensor is great, but the brain behind the sensor matters just as much.
It really does. In 2026, the ISP, or image signal processor, is often integrated directly into the main chip, like the Snapdragon 8 Gen 5 or the latest Google Tensor G5. For Daniel, who mentioned he is originally from Ireland but now in Jerusalem, he is probably dealing with some very harsh bright light during the day and deep, complex shadows in the old city at night. He needs a phone with incredible HDR processing.
High dynamic range. We talk about this a lot with TVs, but it is even more critical for a camera, right?
It is the ability to take a photo where the bright Jerusalem sun hitting a white stone wall doesn't blow out into a pure white blob, while the dark alleyway next to it isn't just a black void. Google is still the king of this with their HDR Plus algorithms. They take a burst of photos at different exposures and stitch them together in milliseconds. If Daniel wants that point and shoot and it always looks perfect, feel the Pixel Pro series is hard to beat. Their semantic segmentation is incredible.
Explain that for the folks at home. Semantic segmentation. It sounds like something out of a linguistics textbook.
It is the phone's ability to recognize exactly what is in the frame. It sees a face, it sees the sky, it sees a circuit board, and it applies different processing to each part of the image simultaneously. It might sharpen the text on a microchip for Daniel's repair work while simultaneously softening the skin tones on a photo of little Ezra and enhancing the blue of the sky. It is doing thousands of calculations per millisecond to make sure every part of the photo is optimized.
That connects back to what we discussed in episode 682 about the microphones in smartphones being better than people think because of the processing. It is the same thing with the cameras. The hardware is the foundation, but the AI is the architect. Daniel mentioned he is a big fan of the speech-to-text on his Nord, using the Futo keyboard. That suggests he values on-device processing and privacy. He doesn't want his data being shipped off to a cloud server just to turn his voice into text.
Which is a great point. If he wants to stay in that lane, he should look at how much of the photo processing is happening on the device versus the cloud. Google does a lot of heavy lifting on their tensor chips now, which is very fast. But manufacturers like Sony, with their Xperia 1 Mark 7 line, which should be out or announced right about now, take a much more traditional approach. They give you the raw tools and stay out of your way.
Sony is an interesting one. They're basically the ones making the sensors for everyone else, right? They are the arms dealer in this camera war.
They are, but their own phones are built for people who want a real camera experience. They have a physical shutter button with a half press for focus. For someone like Daniel, who is doing stock photography for Pexels, that might actually be very appealing. It feels less like a computer and more like a precision instrument. The downside is that Sony's computational magic isn't as aggressive as Google's or Samsung's, so you have to work a bit harder for the shot. You have to understand ISO and shutter speed.
Let's talk about the manufacturers and the damage to the wallet. If Daniel wants to stay Android, his big three options for elite photography are Samsung, Google, and the high-end Chinese imports, like Xiaomi or Vivo, though those can be harder to get depending on local availability in Israel.
Samsung's Galaxy S26 Ultra is the everything phone. It has the 200 megapixel main sensor, which uses incredible pixel binning to create amazing detail even in low light. It has two different telephoto lenses, usually a 3 times and a 5 times or 10 times. It is the Swiss Army knife. If Daniel wants to be able to zoom in from the back of a room to see a serial number on a device, the Samsung is the winner. The price range there is usually between $1,200 and $1,500.
And the Pixel?
The Pixel 10 Pro or 11 Pro is the king of vibe. It captures motion better than anyone else. If little Ezra is running around, the Pixel is the least likely to give you a blurry face because it uses a feature called Face Unblur that uses data from multiple cameras. It is also, in my opinion, the best at skin tones. But it doesn't always have the raw hardware muscle, the giant sensors of the Samsung or the Chinese flagships. You are looking at around $1,000 to $1,200 there.
Then you have the Ultra phones from China, the Xiaomi 16 Ultra or the Vivo X100 Pro Plus. These are the ones that actually put those 1-inch sensors in. They often partner with legendary camera brands like Leica or Zeiss.
Those are the ones that really excite me as a nerd. When you see that Zeiss logo on a Vivo phone, it is not just branding. They are using T-Star coating on the lenses to reduce flare. If Daniel is taking photos in Jerusalem with those bright streetlights and dark shadows, that coating makes a massive difference. It prevents those weird ghosting artifacts you see on cheaper lenses. These phones are often in the $1,200 to $1,600 range, but they are essentially professional cameras that happen to make phone calls.
So if Daniel is looking at a spec sheet, he wants to see 1-inch sensor, f1.8 or wider aperture, periscope zoom with at least 5 times optical, and OIS.
OIS is mandatory. Optical image stabilization, especially for his tech repairs. If he is holding the phone over a circuit board, his hands are going to shake a little bit, especially if he is trying to be precise. OIS physically moves the lens or the sensor to compensate for that shake. Without it, his macro shots will be blurry, no matter how many megapixels he has. He should check if all the lenses have OIS, not just the main one. Often, manufacturers cheap out and only put it on the primary sensor, leaving the zoom lens shaky and hard to use.
That is a sneaky detail. What about the front camera? Daniel mentioned his Nord has a 16 megapixel front. Does that matter for his use case?
For tech repair, probably not. But for family stuff, he should look for a front camera with autofocus. Most front cameras have a fixed focus, which is why your selfies look blurry if you hold the phone too close or too far. High-end phones like the S series or the Pixels have autofocus on the front now, which is a huge upgrade for video calls or photos with the family.
We should also mention the video side of things. Daniel didn't specifically ask about it, but if he is contributing to stock sites, high-quality 4K or even 8K video at 60 frames per second is a huge asset, and he should look for 10-bit color depth.
Oh, good catch. 10-bit color means the phone can record over 1 billion different colors compared to the 16.7 million colors in standard 8-bit. This prevents banding in the sky or on smooth surfaces. It gives his stock photography and video a much more professional, cinematic look. It is something you don't realize you need until you see it side by side.
I remember back in episode 5 on 98, we talked about audio engineering as prompt engineering. There is a similar logic here. If you give the AI better data, meaning a better sensor and better glass, the resulting prompt the phone processes is much higher quality. You can't AI your way out of bad physics. You can't sharpen a blurry photo and expect it to look like a National Geographic cover.
You really can't. You can sharpen a blurry photo, but you can't recreate detail that was never captured by the sensor in the first place. That is why I always tell people to prioritize the primary sensor size over everything else. If the main sensor is huge, everything else follows. It is the foundation of the house.
So for Daniel, the roadmap is clear. He has outgrown the mid-range. He is doing professional level work with his phone, and he deserves professional level hardware. If he stays in the Android world, he is looking at that $1,000 plus tier. It is a big jump from the Nord 3, but based on how much value he is already getting out of a $300 phone, the return on investment for his repairs and his photography side hustle seems worth it.
I agree. And honestly, for someone living in a place as visually rich as Jerusalem, having a world-class camera in your pocket is almost a necessity. Think of all the textures of the stone, the lighting in the markets, the history in every corner. He is going to have a field day with a 1-inch sensor. He might even find himself doing more photography than tech repair.
I'm actually a bit jealous. I'm still rocking a phone from 2 years ago, and hearing you talk about variable apertures and T-star coatings is making me want to go shopping.
You and me both, Corn. But I promised Mum I wouldn't spend any more money on gadgets until I fixed her printer and got her that new tablet she wants for her recipes.
Good luck with that. Fixing a printer is harder than any circuit board repair Daniel is doing. It is the final boss of tech support.
Tell me about it. I'd rather desolder a CPU than deal with a paper jam.
Alright, let's wrap this up with some concrete takeaways for Daniel. When you are looking at that next phone, do not just look at the megapixel count. Look for the sensor size in inches. Aim for that 1-inch type. Look for periscope zoom if you want real distance. Make sure you have OIS on all your lenses. And if you are doing stock photography, make sure the phone supports a robust RAW format and 10-bit color.
And don't forget to check the macro capabilities of the ultra-wide lens. For your tech repairs, that is going to be your most used feature. Look for a phone that can focus at least as close as 2 or 3 centimeters. That is the difference between seeing a chip and seeing the serial number on the chip.
This has been a great deep dive. Daniel, thanks for the prompt. It is always great to hear how you are using technology in your daily life in Jerusalem. Give our best to Hannah and little Ezra. We hope the next phone captures some amazing memories for you.
And if you are listening and enjoying these deep dives into the weird and wonderful world of technology, we would really appreciate it if you could leave us a review on your favorite podcast app. It really helps other people find the show and keeps us going.
It really does. You can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. Our website is myweirdprompts.com, where you can find our full archive and a contact form if you want to send us a prompt of your own. You can also email us directly at show@myweirdprompts.com.
And as always, a quick shout out to Suno for generating our show music. It is amazing what you can do with a few well-placed prompts these days. It really sets the mood.
All right, Herman. I think it is time to go find that brisket Dorothy left. I can smell the carrots from here.
I'll race you to the fridge. But if you take the blue lid Tupperware, I'm telling Mum.
Thanks for listening to My Weird Prompts. We will see you in the next episode.
Bye, everyone.
This episode was generated using Gemini Flash 3. Text-to-speech engine was Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show, My Weird Prompts, where our thoughts go from slow takes to facts on cue. We change and follow through. My Weird Prompts, that's the flows from sloth